afternoon. Yes, Mr Wilcox.
Please the Court, I appear with Ms Ward, Senior Counsel.
Thank you. I'll take other appearances now, please.
If Your Honour pleases, my name is Free. I appear with my learned friends Mr Newton and Ms Woodland for the Commissioner for the RFS, the National Parks and Wildlife Service and the Forestry Corporation of New South Wales.
Free.
May it please the Court, Rose, ROSE, I appear for the Commissioner of New South Wales Police.
Thank you, Ms Rose. Then on the screen, I think.
Good afternoon, Coroner. It's Ms Wilkinson from Spark Hill Lawyers representing Essential Energy.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Yes, Mr Wilcox.
Yes, Your Honour, I'll commence with some brief opening remarks. This afternoon's hearing commences with the first in a series of case studies drawing upon selected bushfires from the 2019 to 2020 bushfire season. These matters have already been the subject of cause and origin inquiries during stage 1 of the proceedings. The Court will now proceed to a general inquiry into specific fires pursuant to Section 32, subsection 3 of the Coroners Act, focusing on selected systemic issues identified by Counsel Assisting Team with Your Honour's approval. Such general inquiries will continue for the balance of this month and extends into next year. In the remaining September 2022 hearings, Your Honour will examine the following case studies. Today, 19 September 2022, and tomorrow, 20 September, issues around both New South Wales Police and New South Wales Rural Fire Service investigations into the bushfires, using the examples of the investigations into the Creewar cluster of fires, the Mount Mackenzie Road Tenterfield fire, and the Gross Valley fire. The Gross Valley fire will also be the subject of further evidence next year, investigating decision-making around a backburn strategy implemented along Bell's Line of Road and Mount Wilson Road. This Wednesday, 21 September, and Friday, 23 September, issues around the use of communications and emergency alerts, using the example of the Kangawalla Die Hard fire. And next week, on Wednesday, 28 September, and Thursday, 29 September, issues around the appropriateness of Essential Energy's bushfire risk classification regime using the Failford Road Darrawank fire. The Creewar cluster of fires, as Your Honour will recall, burned in the southern region of the state from 23 January 2020 until early March 2020. The fire complex comprised the Creewar Road Glen Allen fire, which originated in the Snowy Monaro Police District, likely as a consequence of a tree falling on power lines. The Big Jack Mountain fire, which originated in the South Coast Police District, likely as a result of lightning strike, although there was no cause and origin investigation at the suspected area of origin. And the Postman's Trail fire, which also originated in the South Coast Police District, likely as a result of a spot over from the Creewar fire, although again there was no cause and origin investigation at the suspected area of origin. On the one hand, the Creewar cluster of fires might be seen as a relatively small grouping of fires, given the scale of loss across the state in 2019 to 2020. On the other hand, combined losses from these fires included the destruction of over 40 residences. The scale of that loss on a personal level cannot be underestimated. Today, Your Honour will hear from Detective Inspector Richard Puffett, Investigations Coordinator within the Arson Unit in the State Crime Command of New South Wales Police. Detective Puffett's evidence will address the following matters as identified in the issues list, which has previously circulated to the parties. Firstly, guidance to New South Wales Police statewide as to the nature and scope of investigations into fires to be undertaken across the 2019 to 2020 bushfire season, the circumstances in which New South Wales Police were required to report fires to the coroner across the 2019 to 2020 bushfire season, the process for allocating and pursuing police investigations into fires across local government areas, police districts or police area command boundaries, information sharing between New South Wales Police and the Rural Fire Service as to naming conventions for bushfires and access to ICON records once fires merged, and are recommendations desirable to ensure greater collaboration between New South Wales Police and the Rural Fire Service in the course of New South Wales Police undertaking bushfire cause and origin investigations. Tomorrow, Your Honour will hear evidence firstly from the officer in charge of the Grose Valley Fire, Detective Sergeant Laura Harvey, and then concurrent evidence from 2 employees of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, Assistant Commissioner Operations Ben Millington, and Fire Investigation Coordinator Mark Fulliger. I pause to note that the team assisting Your Honour has received information today that Mr Fulliger is unwell, so his appearance is anticipated by AVL, but subject to confirmation in due course. Mr Millington and Mr Fulliger's evidence will address the following matters identified in the issues list: the purpose behind Rural Fire Service fire investigations and the authority to conduct such investigations, including investigations into the cause and origin of a fire, fire scene investigations of the point at which a fire is believed to have crossed from one LGA boundary into another LGA, or from an area subject to a Section 44 declaration to another area, any fire investigation required when a fire is thought to be an extension of another fire, though annexed and managed as a separate incident on ICON, and the process for determining which type of investigation will be carried out, the process for conducting a cause and origin investigation requested by New South Wales Police, including the process for determining when a fire investigation instead of a cause and origin investigation will be undertaken, the process for communicating when a requested cause and origin investigation cannot be complied with, whether in whole or in part, and if reasons should be provided, and the process that applies when it is agreed a joint investigation will be undertaken between RFS and New South Wales Police. Then the training and qualifications of RFS authorised fire investigators, including the qualifications and experience required to be a fire investigator, the training, including refresher training provided to fire investigators, whether a fire investigator should set out in a cause and origin report any reasonable hypothesis as to cause and origin, including evidence both for and against that hypothesis, the communications that should occur between the fire investigator and New South Wales Police or other relevant party about seizing physical exhibits and or undertaking further investigations that the fire investigator reasonably believes are necessary in order to determine cause and origin, whether a fire investigator should include in a cause and origin investigation report detail of relevant discussions with other people at a fire investigation scene, where such discussions might include information that supports or detracts from a hypothesis about cause and origin, and the steps a fire investigator should take after having prepared a cause and origin investigation report if they receive information that causes them to change the views expressed in that report. Then allocation of fire investigators to particular matters, including the process for allocating a fire investigator to investigate a particular fire, and whether a fire investigator has discretion to vary the scope of the investigation or request changes to the scope of the investigation if preliminary investigations suggest this is warranted, and are recommendations desirable to ensure greater collaboration between New South Wales Police and the Rural Fire Service in the course of New South Wales Police undertaking bushfire cause and origin investigations. Given that in certain circumstances investigations into individual fires are reported to Your Honour as State Coroner, it is important for the Court and through the Court for the public to have confidence in the integrity of the conclusions expressed within wildfire or bushfire investigations. Noting the overlap in subject matter between issues raised by the Coronial cluster of fires, the Mount Mackenzie Tennerfield fire, and the investigation into the scene at which the Grose Valley fire first ignited, Council assisting intend to prepare one set of written submissions addressing this topic. Parties will be consulted about a timetable for their submissions in reply, noting that some parties have an interest limited to one fire within the broader topic. Before evidence commences, I will hand up to the court a non-publication order as agreed between counsel assisting and the Commissioner of Police. I understand that other parties have seen the short minute of order and have no objection to orders being made in those terms. If that's the case, I will invite Your Honour to make the orders as set out in that document, and I understand Your Honour has a copy. Or if Your Honour doesn't, I can hand one up as foreshadowed. I'll do that.
Yes, thank you, Mr Wilkinson. I make that order now.
That please the court.
Yes, Ms Ward.
Your Honour, the only witness for today is Detective Chief Inspector Richard Puffett. I call her Detective Chief Inspector now.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say I do. I do.
Thank you, Detective Chief Inspector. Have a seat and feel free, if you'd like to take your mask off, you're certainly welcome to. And Ms Ward, if you would like to sit down, of course you may. I know you have an injury to your leg.
I'll see how I go.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honour. So would you state your full name, your rank and unit within the New South Wales Police?
It's Richard Puffett, Detective Chief Inspector, currently attached to the Arson Unit, which is part of the Financial Crime Squad at State Crime Command.
In that capacity, have you prepared a statement to assist Her Honour's inquiry into various of the fires through 2019-2020, being a statement dated the 3rd of May 2022?
I have.
And have you a copy of that statement available with you?
I do.
Are there any corrections or amendments you seek to make to that statement?
No.
Are the contents true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
In your role as Detective Chief Inspector for the Arson Unit with New South Wales Police, have you also engaged in consultation with Her Honour and others within New South Wales Police in the development of a new set of criteria for the reporting of fires to the coroner?
I have.
And is that a new set of criteria due to come into effect from the 1st of October of this year? Your Honour is familiar with this document, of course, but still I will tender it for inclusion within the brief.
Thank you. That would be, I think we're up to Exhibit 62.
I think the parties have already seen that electronically. If not, I've got hard copies that are available. Thank you, Your Honour. 62, was it, Your Honour?
Yes.
Thank you. Detective Chief Inspector, we'll come to the new criteria at a later point, but firstly, I wanted to ask you some questions about preparation prior to the 2019-2020 bushfire season commencing. Prior to the commencement of that season, had you received any briefings to suggest that it might be a particularly long or dangerous fire season?
Yes, excuse me. We had our annual briefing with the New South Wales RFS, and part of that briefing is a forecast for the pending bushfire season, and it was actually reported as potentially above average. It wasn't strikingly, apparent that what happened was going to, take place.
So is it fair to say some warning that it might be an above average season, but even with that warning, the season exceeded those expectations in terms of its length and the loss of property and life? Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. It was unprecedented. I know that word's used a lot, but it was, I understand it was our biggest bushfire in the state's history season.
You described that briefing as annual, so does it take place every year before the commencement of the bushfire season?
Yes, it does.
And what sort of information is presented to you and others at New South Wales Police from the RFS or any other agencies involved?
Generally, the agencies are invited into New South Wales RFS headquarters. A season outlook is provided. Then each agency is invited to sort of add comment in terms of preparation. It's generally just a sort of pre-season get together to just sort of try to understand the scope of the season, the upcoming season.
Given that you were told some information suggesting it might be a potentially above average fire season, was there anything that you did in preparation on behalf of New South Wales Police that was different to any other fire year or fire season?
We're fairly standard in the preparation we do under the auspices of Strike Force Toronto, which is the New South Wales Police Force's ongoing perennial response to bushfire investigation. We send out a lot of education, a lot of awareness, documents in a number of forms and fashion. It makes up a big part of our training to the field. But generally, until things started escalating late 2019, and then things went completely crazy after the new year down south, it was probably the same information being delivered. It's consistent. It's in our guidelines. It's in our bushfire hub, the intranet that we manage. So the information was out there, and really we progressed as the season escalated. The information escalated as well.
You've told Her Honour there about sending information out to the field. Are you referring to information being sent from your strike force experts out to local police area commands or police districts?
Yes.
Are the officers that work within Strike Force Toronto people particularly experienced in the investigation of arson and or wildfires or other fire-related crime?
Yes, they are.
Could you briefly outline for Her Honour the role of Strike Force Toronto sitting within the wider investigation resources of New South Wales Police investigating bushfires across the 2019-2020 season?
I guess first to give some context, Strike Force Toronto, it's scalable in terms of the season that's experienced, and that has to be in the way it is. So I have a unit of 18 arson investigators. Strike Force Toronto traditionally involved 3 officers and a detective sergeant. With Black Summer, as it evolved, and quite early on in the piece, it would have been mid-2019, I did escalate or increase the strength of the bushfire component of my unit to 6 investigators and 1 detective sergeant. So I pretty much doubled it, knowing that there was going to be an increased workload for the guys. One major part we play too is the proactive area of catastrophic weather ratings, and when they come through via the RFS, we attend the New South Wales RFS headquarters and play that proactive role, ensuring that our commands increase their vigilance and increase their investigative capacity. So that happened on at least 2 occasions. But in terms of our education, our awareness that continued on, that escalated throughout the season. When the southern region of New South Wales experienced the catastrophic bushfires, causing the majority of deaths after the new year, structure was put in place whereby my investigators under Strikeforce Toronto managed the 14 biggest fires in the southern region that involved approximately 14 deaths. So we were focusing on that. A seconded group of 20 detectives was put in place, run by another detective inspector, to provide support and the review of all the other fires in the state, to provide local detectives and investigators support to ensure that their fires, the other fires, were investigated adequately. So I guess it broke into a two-tiered approach, but ultimately the fires, the commands that own the fires were responsible for those investigations, as they are in crime and any other type of event or incident.
Is this a fair summary then? The majority of fires across the season were investigated by police area commands or police districts in which the fire originated, with the exception of your team being called into those southern region fires where we know most of the deaths occurred?
Yes, so we led those fires.
Then local police in police area commands or police districts were able to access the expertise of the Strikeforce Toronto team if they needed advice or if they needed advice on what to do in the course of any given investigation?
Absolutely. And in fact, the Strikeforce Toronto review and support team also was proactive in identifying fires and speaking directly to those commands and ensuring that the investigations were adequately undertaken. So there was a lot of interaction. We didn't just wait for the commands to approach us or make contact. It was that proactive approach where all the fires reported on our police system. Those fires were proactively canvassed.
Does that mean that some police area commands might have learnt of the existence of a fire within their geographical range from contact from the Strikeforce Toronto second team, rather than local intel?
Absolutely. A lot of the commands were clearly focused on the emergencies that were occurring too. So, generally sometimes the investigation is put on hold. We don't promote that. It should be part and parcel of the time, but we can understand the challenges that faced a lot of these commands at the time.
When the protection of life and property.
Exactly.
Sorry, I cut you off. Go on.
No, that was it, I think.
How did that the second team within Strikeforce Toronto get the information about fires in particular police area commands? Where was their intel coming from?
Primarily from our COPS, computerised operational policing system. So our reports, police reports, but also RFS reports, which were a lot more. The volume of the RFS reports is a lot higher. But again, a lot of the reports are duplications. So it was generally a combination of both, and they've recorded all of that in their holdings.
Within your statement, you referred to Strikeforce Toronto providing a 72-hour response to all fires. What do you mean by that?
Well, not all fires, but that's part of our assistance to the field. That will attend a command to basically get in there early, help the local detectives investigate the matter, make the decision during that time whether it's an investigation that will lead, and basically just set up that investigation with our expertise.
So physically someone from Strikeforce Toronto will travel down to the area command or the police district for the first 72 hours or thereabouts? Yes,
and we'll do that with structural fires and so forth. And in fact, in the early part of the Black Summer season 2019-20, my detectives provided a lot of the support in the field. Attended the North Coast, where the fires traditionally work their way down the state before the review team was set up. The review team didn't come in until the southern region fires took place. So we were in many of the locations where the North Coast deaths took place, doing exactly that 72-hour response, setting up the investigations and providing that support.
One of the features of the fire season in the North Coast, or the northern part of the state, is that destructive fires commenced before the fire season had commenced.
That's true.
So this was a season where Section 44 declarations were being made before the formal start of the bushfire season.
That's right.
One of the things that you've referred to in your evidence today is the almost educative role that Strikeforce Toronto takes, providing information and advice to investigators in police area commands and police districts. And I just want to turn to that topic now. From your statement, it seems that there were a number of statewide messages that were disseminated from you or from others within your team in the lead up to the bushfire season commencing, on topics such as reporting fires to coroners or how to conduct a cause and origin investigation and the like. Is that a fair summary?
Yes. There's an annual, one of the first emails, statewide emails, relates to a general, preparation email outlining the...
Sent a message that you then annexed to your statement. If you could turn, please, to page 18-3 of your statement. This is within the Creewar Cluster of Fires Brief of Evidence, Volume 1, Tab 4.
Sorry, you're talking about the actual message?
Yes.
So if you... It's not part of my statement, unfortunately, so
I'm going to take you to... You tell me whether or not this is the actual message. I'm not on the Nemesis messages yet, okay. But this seems to be a reference to some bushfire reporting guidelines that were disseminated under your name on the 5th of June 2019. So, Detective Chief Inspector, using the red numbers at the bottom right-hand side, could you turn up page 18-3?
Oh, we might not have
sorry.
brief there.
I've got my own.
There we go. So that's Volume 1 of the Creewar Cluster of Fires Brief of Evidence, is that right?
Volume 1?
Volume 1.
Tab 4.
Is it here? It might be the same. This might be the same here, sorry. It's got a red tag. Is that it? Okay. Sorry about that. I didn't read.
So volume 4 should be your, tab 4 should be your statement.
I don't know that that's the right.
Tab 4. It is, yes.
And then behind, using the numbers in the bottom right-hand corner, it's page 18-3.
Okay. Yes.
All right, and we'll check we're on the same page. Do you have there a document entitled Bushfire Reporting and Investigation Guidelines?
Yes.
And then if you could come over the next page, please. Do you see that seems to be a document that was disseminated in your name on the 5th of June 2019?
Yes, I don't have date, but that rings a bell.
Down at the very bottom of the page underneath your...
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay. Were these guidelines something that were sent out to local investigators in police area commands and police districts in advance of the fire season commencing?
Yes, but not part of that, the statewide email. I think they're referred to, and the email contains similar content to the statewide email, but those are loaded onto our Bushfire hub, which is our intranet, which is accessible to the field, and referred to in that statewide email.
Well, I'll just ask you some questions on this document while it's open before we get to the statewide email. Do you see at the top of the page there's reference to local arrangements should be made, possibly through the bushfire management committees to ensure the timely reporting of fires to police by other agencies?
Yes.
What type of things did you have in mind at a local level besides some sort of liaison with bushfire management committees to ensure that local police were being appropriately notified of new fires in their area command or district?
Generally just, again, that education and awareness that we promote, that all fires, including bushfires, need to be investigated by local police. And then if they reach the Coronial reporting criteria, that they be reported as such. But again, we promote that local, especially in the regional areas, that local police are involved in these local committees to work together with the fire agencies or any other organisation to ensure that the reporting is consistent.
Particularly important across the scale of this season, where there were so many fires being reported by different people at different times and perhaps receiving different names at the time that they were phoning the reports through.
Of course, yeah.
You've got to try and get information from as many sources as possible in the hope that police will be appropriately notified of new fires in their area command or district.
That's right.
At a statewide level, we know that there was the second team within Strike Force Toronto that came on later in the season. Earlier in the season, was there also a police liaison officer based at the RFS Centre at Homebush who might be able to feed information back and forth between the two organisations?
Yes, there is. We have a strong rapport with our with that unit that works within the New South Wales RFS. In fact, they're traditionally embedded with us during the bushfire season. But again, the nature of that season meant that they were redeployed into different, operational need in terms of the fighting of the fires.
Was the Rural Fire Service obliged to report new fires to New South Wales Police?
It's not mandated, but it's encouraged. In fact, we some years ago organised a system through our police assistance line that made it easier to report. So we traditionally and constantly encourage the reporting. Again, being a predominantly volunteer organisation, I think there's a reluctance for them to mandate it because it can take time to make the report. But again, we'd obviously, anything that promotes the reporting of fires to police, we encourage.
Does that mean that New South Wales Police have an interest in knowing about every single fire that burns across every single area command and police district on any given day of the year?
Yes, we promote that. It could be the smallest roadside ignition if it's deliberate. That could be the next, big fire. So we try to promote that all fires get at least some level of investigation and reporting to give us that awareness to see if there's a pattern.
Even if reported, so that police can make a decision as to the nature of the investigation that would follow?
Yes.
That should be your decision, not the decision of a local RFS crew? That's
correct. I mean, there's obviously scope due to the high volume nature of fires in any given period. There is scope if that fire is clearly accidental and not reportable under the criteria, then we'd be okay with that being dealt with, potentially without our knowledge. But again, I just think it's healthy that we get the reports to at least have a record, and then we can understand better if there's patterns, themes.
If we come partway down that page, so we're now on page 18-4, do you see a reference there starting with police will report bushfires to the state coroner in the following circumstances?
Yes.
And then 4 criteria are set out below. Do you see that?
Yes.
Those 4 criteria are criteria that were established back in 2003 during the time of then State Coroner Abernathy. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And those criteria relate to the reporting of bushfires, but are there separate criteria relating to general fires, general explosions or structural fires?
Yes, two criteria, one for structure and one for bushfires traditionally.
All right. And then just to illustrate that point, can we turn to the Police Handbook, please? Again, using the numbers in the bottom right-hand corner, could you turn up page 18-130? Okay. Now, you've annexed there, haven't you, an extract from the Police Handbook dealing with coroners matters?
Yes.
And we can see from the date range just under the heading at the top of the page that this was a chapter that had been reviewed and updated in December of 2018.
Yes.
So therefore in force at the time of the 2019-2020 season, presumably. Is that likely to be right?
Yes.
Thank you. Then if we come over to page 18-132, do you see halfway down the page there, Detective Chief Inspector, the reference to fire and explosions?
Yes.
Does the handbook there set out the reporting criteria for fires other than bushfires?
Yes. The main difference being a monetary value in terms of the damage.
And then if we come over, please, to the next page, 18-133.
Yes.
Do we find at the bottom of that page, under the heading of reporting of bushfires to the coroner, those bushfire criteria dating from back in 2003?
Yes.
Now, the bushfire criteria for reporting fires to coroner was something that you referred to in a message via the Nemesis messaging service in July of, I think, 2019. Does that sound about right? And I'll take you to the page when I find it. Do you recall disseminating messages via something called Nemesis?
Yes, that's the statewide mechanism we use for basically generally to all police.
All right. In the copy of the brief in front of you, could you turn to tab 4A? And then behind that tab, page 18-208.
Yes.
And do you have there, Detective Chief Inspector, a copy of a message on the mandatory reporting of bushfires to the State Coroner?
Yes.
Was that a message that you disseminated on the 1st of July 2022? I'm just looking at the date that sits partway down the page under the heading of mandatory reporting of bushfires to the State Coroner.
I think that was the 4th of February 2020.
Yes, sorry, that can't be right, 2022. 4th of February 2020.
Yes.
All right. And
Well, my sergeant at the time, Peter, under my authority. Yeah.
Thank you. And you there refer to the criteria for reporting of fire to coroner, listing the 4 separate criteria under the heading of bushfires are to be reported to the coroner. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that, again, is the 2003 criteria.
It was the criteria, yeah, at that time, as a reminder with the season going the way it was. That was a reminder that there was that responsibility to ensure the coroner was, that all these fires were getting reported, or as many as possible.
You also annexed to your statement an email that was sent by Detective Sergeant El Kanza on the 16th of September 2019, so prior to the Nemesis message that you sent. Could I ask you please to turn up page 18127 of tab 4?
Yes.
And do you have there a copy of that email that was disseminated by the Detective Sergeant?
Yes, I do. The content is, I think, on a Word document here, but I have searched for the actual email template, but that's the content of it right there.
That's fine. All we need is the content. One of the things that the Detective Sergeant seems to do in the first paragraph of this email is give warning to police in local area commands or police districts that the majority of the state had entered a bushfire danger period early. Do you see that in the first paragraph?
Yes.
What, if anything, did you hope that the commands or districts would be able to do in light of this notice that the season had in fact started earlier?
Just to heighten that vigilance and that reinforce that expectation that bushfires need to be adequately investigated and resources be allocated where needed. I think we were in a drought period too, and that was something the New South Wales RFS had sort of reinforced in that pre-season briefing that I think at that time we were seeing those early fires up north, which is traditionally, normally you don't see that activity until later in the season.
Yep. Could you then turn over to page 18128, so just the next page? And do you see that within this email, the Detective Sergeant refers to the Bushfire Hub, which you've already spoken of in your evidence today?
Yes.
And one of the things that this refers to is information available on the Bushfire Hub, including lightning data. This is in the third paragraph from the top.
Yes.
Do you know what sort of lightning data was available to local police via the Bushfire Hub?
I believe it's a link to the BOM, the Bureau of Meteorology. So probably no more than any normal access you can make with the BOM in terms of that. Generally, when it comes to lightning data for the bigger fires, the local investigators will speak to us and will facilitate that access to that information through the New South Wales RFS that have a licence with the BOM, and they normally include that data in their reports that again make up our briefs of evidence for these fires.
So the Bushfire Hub contains a level of general bushfire. Withdraw that. The Bushfire Hub contains a level of general lightning strike data, but ideally local officers in consultation with Strike Force Toronto might be able to obtain more specific data via the RFS in one form or another.
Yes, and the scene investigators through our, whether it be our crime scene investigators, our primary forensic resource, or the fire agency scene investigator will again make their own inquiries to make sure that's included in their reports.
One of the difficulties with this season being, though, that there are some fires where there was no scene investigation conducted either by vets within New South Wales Police or by the Rural Fire Service. Are you aware of some fires that have fallen into that category?
Yeah, I understand that has taken place on occasion, and again, it's contrary to what we think is best practice. But for various reasons, I think that had fallen down in relation to a few, and I guess the magnitude of the season, but also just maybe a lack of awareness. And the nature of the fires too. These fires went for months on end, overlapped each other. There was a spot over. The fire naming conventions, we'll probably get to that, but that all added to, I guess, some confusion at times.
If we contrast 2019-2020 with a so-called normal fire season,
yes.
Assume that a so-called normal fire season even exists, but if we compare 2019-2020 to an average season, in an average season, would you typically expect every bushfire that's been notified to New South Wales Police would receive some sort of scene investigation either by vets or by the Rural Fire Service?
Yes, that's again best practice, and we promote it. Again, we insist that our primary forensic resource, being our crime scene officers, are trained in fire scenes, that they should be called upon for all fires, regardless of their size.
One of the things that this email does in paragraph 2 on that page is refer to some standard operating procedures being attached. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is one of the standard operating procedures there attached likely to be the Strike Force Toronto standard operating procedure?
Yes.
On bushfire reporting and investigations?
Yes.
Now, I'll take you to that standard operating procedure now, Detective Chief Inspector. It's page 18111. You can just turn that up and tell me when you found it.
Yes.
So check that we're on the right page. We have Strike Force Toronto Standard Operating Procedures, Bushfire Reporting and Investigations.
Yes.
And then could you come over to the next page of that document, please? And then tell me if this is a fair summary. The standard operating procedure required all bushfires be recorded on the COPS system, but not all bushfires needed to be reported to the state coroner.
That's right.
In terms of those fires that were reported on COPS but not required to be reported to the state coroner, what was your expectation as to the minimum level of investigation that a local police officer would conduct into those fires?
At least a COPS report. We call that an event. So we record the fire, attendance at the scene, and involving our forensic services, our crime scene or fire scene investigators to examine that scene, unless it's clearly a case of being an accidental fire. But if that fire was to cause some type of damage, we would expect that would still be, regardless of the suspected cause, that it would still require some scene examination. And that's also, we would expect for the bigger fires that we utilise the fire agency that has jurisdiction of that scene to assist with that scene examination, working hand in hand with our crime scene officer.
In this scenario where the fire ultimately is not of a type that needs to be reported to the state coroner, but nonetheless still needs a COPS event created, would it be your expectation that the investigating officer would also speak to the RFS and see if there's relevant information to obtained from the first responders to the fire?
Yes, that would be something that we expect, whether that happens for every smaller fires.
That's right. So we'll talk about expectations. If the intel coming back to the police officer suggested that lightning strike was a potential cause, would you expect the officer to attempt to obtain lightning strike data either via the generalised information available on the Bushfire Hub or by contacting the Strike Force Toronto team and getting some more specialised information via the RFS?
Yes, we'd facilitate that process and provide that advice.
And what about an expectation that the investigating officer might obtain from the Rural Fire Service some early line scans showing the early progress of the fire, or fire spread mapping that might show, for instance, the final footprint of the fire once it was ultimately declared out?
Yes, again, we rely on that sort of data and material for when we're compiling our investigations. It's probably not widely known out in the field. So that's something, again, we'd reiterate and provide that advice. This is what's available to you through the, mainly the RFS and their fire behavioural experts to provide that for, for our obviously the spread of the fire is important in terms of not only a coronial brief of evidence, but if that fire was a deliberate fire, criminal act, then of course we need that to satisfy the proofs of whatever action we may take.
The final footprint of the fire might demonstrate that it had crossed from one police district or local government area into another.
It often did in Blackstone.
That's right. And it's important, isn't it, for the local police investigating the cause and origin of these fires to have an understanding of the full reach of the fire that has commenced in their territory but may have extended far beyond.
Yes.
How was this level of detail communicated to investigators in the field, either via the Arson Investigators Information Package, which seems to have been available on the Bushfire Hub, or via their consultation with the experts at Strike Force Toronto?
That would be both. As I said, the review and support team were proactive in making contact with the officers in charge in the field, and that advice would have been provided at that time.
And would you have that expectation as to the minimum level of inquiries that an officer might conduct into a cause and origin investigation? Is that your current expectation of the minimum level of investigations they would make?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Yes, sorry. Next fire season is probably fast upon us if it hasn't already commenced. For this fire season, do you have a similar expectation that a police officer in a area command or police district investigating a fire, even though it's not of a sort that needs to be reported to the coroner, would need to undertake these sort of investigations as a minimum?
Yes.
Could I ask you now to turn to page 115 of that standard operating procedure? So 18-115.
Yes.
Partway down that page, Detective Chief Inspector, it refers to fires being disseminated to the coroner. Do you see that reference?
Yes.
And there seem to be a range of criteria that are included in the 5 dot points underneath that are different to the 2003 criteria for reporting bushfires to the coroner or to the state coroner. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
There's some similarity, there's some overlap in the criteria, but they're not identical. And in particular, can I suggest the 2003 criteria included reporting to the coroner when the cause and origin of the bushfire is unclear. And that doesn't seem to be included within the standard operating procedures here. Do you agree with that?
Yes. I'm wondering whether the term dissemination, maybe that's been somewhat, a lower threshold to the actual reporting criteria. So whether that was to our coroner support unit for their information, it may have got blurred there a little bit. But it is, as you say, aligned to, it seems to be aligned to the reporting criteria.
It's just that Her Honour is aware that there were some fires within the Krewa cluster that on one view probably triggered the need for reporting to the state coroner but were not reported in a timely fashion. And I'm just wondering whether you'd agree it's possible that officers in the field might have read this criteria as being different to the 2003 criteria, and that might have influenced delay in reporting. Now, if that's too speculative, just say so.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that this criteria or this dissemination section would have been the paramount to their thinking at the time.
They should have been looking at the nemesis message from you, which included the 2003 criteria front and centre, and related messages.
Bearing in mind, these officers in charge had a lot of advice and were in contact with not only my investigators but the review and support investigators if it wasn't one of our investigators. And my understanding is, in terms of Krewa, that particular detective was the second in charge for one of my fires, being the border fire. So I think well versed in what the expectations are, I would think.
Just while we're on the topic of the way in which there might be criteria for dissemination to the coroner versus criteria for reporting to the coroner, there's a memorandum of understanding between the fire investigation agencies in New South Wales, Police, RFS and Fire and Rescue New South Wales. You're aware of the Memorandum of Understanding?
Yes.
And I think that it's due for review every 5 years, which brings it up for review sometime next year. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
That Memorandum of Understanding itself seems to incorporate the criteria relating to structural fires without reference to the 2003 criteria for bushfires. If that's the case, is that something that you would expect New South Wales Police could take up in the discussions next year when a new Memorandum of Understanding falls to be determined or negotiated?
Yes, that should reflect the current criteria of the time. I'm not sure why that's not in there.
Look, I'll stand to be corrected. It could be in there somewhere else and I've missed it, but on my read through, it refers to one set of criteria but not the other. Is it fair to say that one of the advantages of the new criteria that are due to commence from the start of October of this year is that you've now moved from two separate sets of criteria for reporting to the coroner and amalgamated that into one set?
Absolutely. Her Honour's well aware, even before Black Summer, we were trying to unify that criteria. That just prior to the season.
Much easier for people to keep track of and understand what their obligations are.
Yes, I think it was quite confusing, not only to police, but everybody working in the space. And part of the reason there was a lot of talk during the season about a change in the criteria was that the bushfire criteria at the time was more criminal-based in its approach, its spirit, and a lot of the big fires in Black Summer wouldn't have been captured by the criteria, because part of it is if cause is not known or suspected, where we knew early on a lot of these fires were lightning strikes. So you could argue some of them weren't reportable, and we obviously saw that as an anomaly.
From the material you contain within your brief, it seems that that anomaly became obvious even during the course of the season. And so you moved quickly to try and reform the reporting criteria to catch the big fires, including those where cause and origin was tolerably clear, but where the extent of the fire was so extraordinary it would benefit, it should trigger reporting to the State Coroner. Fair summary? This new set of reporting criteria is going to require some updating of a number of police standard operating procedures, police handbooks and other memorandum of understanding to reflect the new criteria.
Yes.
I just want to ask you now some specific questions going to the specific Creewar, the 3 fires within the Creewar cluster. The Creewar fire itself, we understand, led to the destruction of 5 homes and then additional infrastructure in the police district in which it commenced. And I wanted to ask you whether or not you thought that a fire with that scale of damage might amount to a fire that triggered the need to report to the coroner under the criteria that will commence next month.
I guess that's an interpretation of
yes, it must
major,
be always
extensive damage, and in that season, it's on the lower end, I guess. But in any other given season, I'd argue that was substantial damage. So it's not black and white, I guess. I would think during that Black Summer period that any of those fires were reportable for could fit the criteria anyway as having a need, a basic public need to be reported. And that's what we were promoting.
But it's sensible for local officers or indeed Strike Force Toronto officers to have the discretion to determine on any given year whether a fire reaches the threshold of major structural damage or, for instance, a significant impact upon a local community or the public to trigger reporting in the context of what else is going on, what other fires are going on across the season.
Yes. I would think if the fires are encompassing a larger than normal season, that you'd find scope in the new criteria to report most fires of that nature.
Because there's a criteria that refers to a significant impact upon a local community.
Yes, I think that gives great scope to report what we think's important, what the local police communities think. Also, each agency has a provision to report as they see fit, which again gives further scope for reporting.
Ultimately, the 3 fires within the Creewar cluster, so Creewar, Postman's Trail and Big Jack Mountain joined or coalesced. And if we look at the scale of the loss across those 3 fires, it seems that in excess of 40 homes were lost, plus other outbuildings, infrastructure,
yes,
livestock and the like. A fire of that scale in a so-called average bushfire season would be a fire that should be reported to the State Coroner. Would you agree with that?
In context, the prior to Black Summer, our biggest fire in recent years we investigated was Tathra. 80 odd houses destroyed, and again that was clearly, in our view, reportable, even though it was under that existing bushfire criteria and there were no deaths or serious injury. We still thought that the impact on that community and obviously the high profile of that fire, that it had to be reported, so we reported that and led that investigation. But again, that's out of, just for a little bit more on context, that Tathra was 2 days or virtually 1 day of fires, where traditionally that's how the duration of the bushfires traditionally are much shorter. I think the length complexity of the fires in Black Summer added to a lot of the confusion as to which fires would be investigated at which time and by who.
If we are to anticipate bushfire seasons that start earlier, run later, and include more catastrophic fire danger days, we can anticipate a greater need for cause and origin investigations on a scale beyond the Tathra experience and hopefully not to the level of the 2019-2020 season, but nonetheless more frequent fires and the need for more frequent fire investigations.
I think so.
Is that something that you're able to plan for in terms of how New South Wales Police will respond to increasing demands on your investigators?
Yes, it's in our mind. We're trying to future-proof, the way we do business in that space. To some point, I guess it has to be scalable. We've had 2 years of La Nina and wet summers, so very minimal major fires, which we needed after the horrendous Black Summer period. But again, I think it needs to be. We need to draw upon resources as the need arises. At the same time, I see my unit, having that need to maintain the expertise, and we do that with Strike Force Toronto. It's not just we talk about bushfire seasons, but for us it's an annual. It never stops. There's bushfires in winter somewhere in the state. So the preparation, the education, the awareness, that's a big part of what we do too. So I think there's always scope for us to be focused on that.
And just coming back to another feature of the Creewar cluster, we had a fire in one police district. This is the Postman's Trail fire, which was likely the result of a spot over from Creewar in another police district entirely.
Yes.
Who would you expect, which police district should commence the cause and origin investigation for the fire that is believed to be the result of a spot over from Creewar?
Well, in that instance, it needs to be established, is it a spot over? If the damage is in one command, someone needs to be assigned, an investigator needs to investigate that bushfire. We would then hope that the investigation would reveal that it is a spot over, even if that fire is in another command, the originating command. But the two investigators, the two commands need to come together and establish, is it a separate fire? Is it a separate ignition? Traditionally, a spot over is considered the same fire, but that needs to be established. And if it is the same fire, again, we go back to the originating command of that fire has ownership. But the command where the damage is, they need to play their part too and investigate that side of it and come together to put that brief of evidence in together, liaise with the RFS, and that's where the mapping becomes crucial. But again, getting scene investigators to these scenes to establish, we still need to confirm it's a spot over.
I just want to ask you some questions now based upon some suggestions from various of the detectives within the arson squad. Some of them are taken from the statement of Detective Senior Constable Waldron in the Good fire, but they're themes that are echoed from many of the officers in charge who've given evidence through the proceedings to date. One of the themes goes to a so-called RFS naming convention for bushfires and circumstances where on some occasions a fire will cross into a new LGA and be given a new name as it burns within that new area.
Yes.
Now, the witnesses from the Rural Fire Service will be asked some questions about this tomorrow, about whether or not a naming convention exists, and if there is a formal convention, what the thinking is behind it. But would you agree with this proposition? Regardless of whether or not there is a convention that fires should receive a new name when they cross into a new local government area, or whether they are to keep the original name but with numbers 1, 2 or 3 added at the end as they expand. What matters is that New South Wales Police and Rural Fire Service need to know what each other is doing in terms of how fires are named and how they are allocated for investigation.
Yes.
So it's not a matter of this court being asked to determine what is the best convention. What needs to be improved, I would ask you to comment on that. What needs to improve is that police understand the way in which RFS will name bushfires so that there is less time wasted in investigating fires that might in fact be a continuation of a pre-existing fire across an LGA. Or at the very least, people can understand what is being discussed when fires are given different names as they cross LGA boundaries.
Yes.
There's been some correspondence received on behalf from the Department of Planning and Environment on behalf of the National Parks and Wildlife Service in relation to investigation of fires that are believed to have commenced within various national parks. I just want to take you to a paragraph of that correspondence, Detective Chief Inspector, and just give you an opportunity to respond. So, National Parks and Wildlife have raised this as an issue because that organisation is of the view there are opportunities for better coordination between agencies at the investigation stage. And they say in this correspondence, because agencies like National Parks and Wildlife Service have specialised knowledge about land tenure, topography and local fire activity, it would be useful to ensure that fire investigators are appropriately briefed by agency officers about the history and/or behaviour of a fire, for example. This will help ensure that key people are interviewed and the broader context of a fire is taken into account to ensure that the most accurate conclusions are reached and important lessons are learned. Now, accepting that you're not in charge of the team at VETS who conduct the actual cause and origin investigations at the scene, can I ask you to comment upon that suggestion from National Parks and Wildlife Service that on relevant fires they might be brought in and perhaps interviewed or statements taken from them to determine whether or not they've got local knowledge about a particular fire scene that could assist the cause and origin investigation?
Yeah, we'd support that. We support that in, as you would in any investigation, to speak to the custodians or the people in the who are responsible for managing that area for the bigger fires for cause and origin. My understanding is that National Parks and Wildlife outsource their scene examinations to the RFS. So
I think the suggestion is not that they should conduct scene investigations themselves. It's that they might have local knowledge relevant to a potential cause and origin investigation. They might know something about lightning strike data, they might know something about fire trails, they might know something about early observations of the fire by their field officers. So I don't think they're setting themselves up as conducting the investigations, but being contacted to see if they can provide anything to assist VETS officers or perhaps RFS scene investigators in the conduct of any cause and origin investigation.
yeah, well, I would expect the officer in charge, the detective or investigator, to manage those inquiries, whereby I don't know if it's normal practice for the scene examiner to be making those inquiries. Potentially in the RFS's case, they may consult. But I look, that's all helpful. I'd encourage any cooperation between the agencies to get to the nuts and bolts of.
The arson investigation information package that's available on the Bushfire Hub does refer to contact with the National Parks and Wildlife Service, but it doesn't go to that sort of level in terms of potentially speaking to them to see if they have relevant information about cause and origin of a particular fire. But if that were thought useful, would that be a convenient place to list that suggestion so that local officers might be prompted to contact National Parks and Wildlife Service about such inquiries?
Yes, well, we can promote that. Again, you've got to imagine traditionally most fires in the national parks are lightning strikes. So again, many were probably not reportable unless they went on to cause some sort of, destruction.
So if not reportable, perhaps less historical involvement between New South Wales Police investigators and National Parks and Wildlife Service pursuing that line of inquiry.
I know if there's a spate of deliberate fires in the national park, then we're very proactive in getting that evidence for our criminal briefs of evidence from the national parks and wildlife. So the more reportable a fire is, the more, the larger the insight will be traditionally.
I just wanted to now ask you some questions about the Memorandum of Understanding. If you could just turn that document up in the annexure to your statement, Detective Chief Inspector. It begins on page 18149. That's the Memorandum of Understanding between the Joint Agency Fire Investigations in New South Wales. But more particularly within the memorandum, there's some entries on page 18-155 that I wanted to ask you about.
I'm sorry, 18...
155?
Okay.
Do you see there a heading at 4.4, Major Incident Bushfire Rapid Response Investigations?
Yes.
And the Memorandum of Understanding seems to provide for an investigation liaison team being established if certain RFS operational readiness and alert level status criteria are met.
Yes.
Was an investigation liaison team of that kind stood up at any point during the 2019-2020 season?
Not officially under that terminology. Again, we work very close to the liaison team in the RFS, but that sort of terminology wasn't utilised. Again, I think a lot of the resources for the RFS were understandably, utilised in the operational firefighting space. So we were, it was challenging to form that, such a group, and we maintain that ourselves, I guess, under the Toronto banner.
Are you suggesting that there was a level of liaison in any event, at least in manner, even if it didn't go by the name of an investigation liaison team as the MOU contemplates?
Yeah, that's right. We had constant contact, and as we were drawing on RFS for a lot of the data for our investigations, but so it was happening, but I guess not under that heading.
Was an investigation liaison team pulled together for the response to the Tathra bushfire?
No, it was more under auspices of the police investigation. Again, with the cooperation of the New South Wales RFS and Fire and Rescue also.
Now, Detective Chief Inspector, I've asked you a number of questions across the course of the afternoon about the response to the 2019-2020 season. I wanted to give you a final opportunity now to outline whether there have been any other changes or initiatives since the 2019-2020 season that we haven't touched upon in your evidence today, but that impact upon the way police would go about responding to such a large number of cause and origin investigations being triggered in the course of any future bushfire seasons.
Again, we've been mindful to reinforce the need for bushfires to be investigated, in the as early as possible. Developments with the criteria, the Coronial reporting criteria, to make it clearer, and generally just putting that awareness and that education out into the field, whether it be by our arson investigators course that focuses heavily on bushfire investigation, or the material available to the field on our bushfire hub, or various other training days. We focus on really delivering that message to the local, the police area commands and police districts. Having said that, it's been 2 years of basically putting the briefs together for the investigations, the major investigations, and we've had those wet seasons, so it's given us that time to prepare. But again, would we do anything differently? We're more aware of what needs to get put up and set up early. I think we would do better in that form if heaven forbid it happens again. But again, I think the response from an organisation, from our investigation, our responsibility to put together the investigations, I think we did as well as we could due to the circumstances. I think all agencies did their best. And into the future, I think that cooperation that was built over the season, I think that would come to the fore again, and I think we'd be better prepared to meet those challenges for such a season.
I should just ask you, what was the process for a FETS crime scene investigation to be arranged for, withdraw that and I'll start again. What was the process for the officer in charge of an investigation into any of the fires across that season to request a FETS officer attend to conduct a cause and origin investigation? And how did that link in with the requirement under the MOU for there to be cooperation and joint investigations where possible?
Well, there's local arrangements to reporting arrangements to organise your forensic officer for any crime or fire, and that doesn't change. That was in place. We could help facilitate the return of investigators should the fire be the scene. Should the scene have not been investigated at the time, and that happened as fires were identified, we played a role in facilitating the FETS during Black Summer, and the review and support team did that also. But generally, the onus is on the OIC to call in our forensic people, and they will attend when asked. And then, in terms of when you talk about joint investigation, I think that might be a bit misleading. At the end of the day, it's the police's jurisdiction and responsibility on behalf of the coroner to investigate fires that are especially reportable. So I'm not sure joint is the right terminology.
Well, let me clarify that. What I'm talking about is a joint attendance where possible, FETS and RFS fire investigators attending the field together, boots on the ground together, to conduct their cause and origin investigation.
Yes, I'm sorry. When we talk about scene examinations, of course, we promote cooperation between the scene investigators to come up with the right result.
Again, was the onus on the officer in charge to try and coordinate a time when someone from FETS and someone from the RFS might be able to conduct a scene investigation together?
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Your Honour. Those are my questions.
Maybe some other questions. Mr. Free.
No questions, Your Honour.
Ms. Rose.
Yes, Your Honour, I have some questions.
Thank you. I might just check Ms. Wilkinson first and let you go last. Ms. Wilkinson, do you have any questions?
No questions, thank you, Your Honour.
Sorry, Ms. Rose.
Thank you, Your Honour. I'd like to ask you some questions about the information sharing that's between the police and the RFS. In the brief, it's not in the Kriwa cluster brief, it is in the general, stage 2 general brief. if that's available to be brought up.
All right, we'll just have to get that, I think. Just one moment, please. May not have that immediately available.
Pretty well.
We might be able to do it on screen. We'll either try and have it brought up on the screen in court, and if we can't do it that way, we can have it brought up on my...
I've got it here, I think, so...
It would be volume 5, tab 46.
The stage.
I think it was only included in the brief yesterday. Potentially may not have found its way to the hard copy version.
We'll see if we can get it up on the screen. We've got it up on the screen, thank you. It's about to come up.
As you'll see there, it's the Memorandum of Understanding between the RFS and New South Wales Police about information sharing.
Yes.
If you turn to the second page, it shows that it was last reviewed in 2017.
Yes, it's currently under review.
It currently is at this time in 2022, it's under review. If we go to the paragraph 2.1, which is on the fourth page, it states that there's certain information that, upon request, the agencies can provide to each other.
Yes.
And if you go down to the lists A to I, it lists certain information that can be provided.
Yes.
Now, it says just above that the information or documents that can be the subject of a request under this MOU are limited to only the following and no other.
Yes.
So that looks like a exclusive list of information that the agencies can share with each other.
Yes, it does.
In practice, however, is there more data or information that the agencies share with each other than is in this list? Or is there a way of interpreting the words in this list in a more expansive manner?
Yeah, I think some of the terminology's probably changed in terms of the reports that come from the agency, from New South Wales Fire and Rescue, Rural Fire Service. We've never had a problem in sharing what we believe is relevant for our investigations and briefs of evidence. So perhaps the terminology of some of the data has changed, and the review, no doubt, we can reflect that in the next during this review at the moment.
In terms of that exchange of information, is it the case that some officers, whether they be local officers or whether the officers from Strike Force Toronto, had access to the RFS icon system?
Generally, that would be my investigators, part of Strike Force Toronto, to have that intimate knowledge of the system. It's not widely, known, and there's a security mechanism involved in that system. So we can access it, but generally, investigators in the field would go through ourselves or directly with the RFS to receive information from ICON.
And is it still the case that your officers in Strike Force Toronto can still access ICON, or has that changed?
The security has changed, and there are the password system has changed, but my understanding, we now receive individual passcodes for my detectives, so that information can be accessible under that new regime.
You, as part of the inquest today, is for understanding possible recommendations that could be made to the agencies to improve the investigations. Is it the case that the Fire and Rescue New South Wales have a specialised investigations unit that can investigate cause and origin of fires?
They do.
And is it the case that the RFS has a similar capability, or is it different?
Different capability. They have from my understanding, rely on a voluntary group of investigators. They do tap into full-time employees, but my understanding is that's not their sole role. They have another role within the organisation and then get called upon to investigate the fires on a needs basis for the bigger fires. We'd love to see a similar model, a professional unit of full-time investigators to assist, with the fire investigation space, cause and origin space. I think for that agency, it would build that level of expertise too. So yeah, that would be on the wish list.
Is it the case that I understand there's been fire progression reports and other helpful information that the RFS has been able to provide the police over the course of these Black Summer investigations? I also understand that there's been some delays in those being available through to capacity or capability of the RFS to produce them any quicker.
Yes, it's understandably the volume was immense, but they provide an amazing, professional, product that we rely on, not just for our coronial briefs of evidence, but should they be criminal in nature, we really rely on those reports and that data.
Is it your, if you had your wish list, to use your words, is it your wish that if there was a professional investigation unit within RFS, they could produce those reports quicker, in effect, for police?
I think that would provide, again, that body of unit that would focus on that side of it and just provide that in a more concise manner and timely manner, I guess.
In other jurisdictions in Australia, the equivalents to the RFS are able to actually investigate or produce briefs for the coroner in other states. Is it your wish, would it be that they would have the capability to produce briefs like that to lessen the load potentially on police or to work in parallel on non-criminal matters?
Yeah, I think the volume of the fires that we see, not only during Black Summer, but in any given normal season, there's a scope for all those non-criminal suspicious fires that are clearly accidental in nature and perhaps don't cause significant damage, that there's scope for that to be put together, that brief of evidence, if it's reportable to the coroner. I know Victoria do operate under that model, so that the police focus on the suspicious and the bigger fires causing major death and destruction.
You mentioned before that the police had set up, was it called a police incident line for RFS personnel to be able to report fires to police?
Well, the police assistance line is set up for I guess, minor crime to be reported more easily in the community. So certain offences can be reported over the phone to these centres, and it was brought in to include bushfires, and a form was completed to help the RFS report these fires in a more easier manner, where they can fax the form in at their discretion. To facilitate, increase the reporting of fires from the RFS to police.
Is that just different to the system that you have with Fire and Rescue New South Wales in terms of fire reporting?
There's no specific form for New South Wales Fire and Rescue. I guess this was designed for bushfire reports, and predominantly Rural Fire Service have jurisdiction in regards to most bushfire areas and reports. We still expect the fire and rescue to report to us, but it's. I think that the spirit of that form was to encourage, predominantly the volunteers who have jobs to go back to. They go to fight a fire, they go back to their job. They don't have time to hang around and wait for police to attend and provide that report. So we understand that. So it was designed to allow that those volunteers to make a report at their convenience once the fire was out.
This is, of course, my terminology, not yours, but if I call that a manual system of reporting, is that different to, for example, the sort of automatic systems, information sharing between Fire and Rescue New South Wales and the police, where your CAD systems can talk to each other and you can see the reports through an electronic database?
Yeah, slightly different in terms of the Fire and Rescue, and again, they predominantly deal with structural fires in the metropolitan area. So their CAD system, their reporting system, automatically activates to ours, is my understanding. So police will be called to a house fire at the same time the Fire and Rescue crew is called. So that you get more, it's a more synergy there and a more synonymous reporting of structural fires. We want, and we're exploring that at the moment, exploring the CAD systems and the reporting of fires, the comms centre for the RFS, to line up with our CAD system to sort of have a similar situation whereby police are also called to bushfires as they take place. It is challenging because, as you could imagine, with bushfires, you may get multiple calls to one, and there are a lot more, there's much more volume involved. So we've got to look into how we can maybe the mechanics of that to make sure that our police aren't, in the regions aren't overly overloaded with attending fires that probably where there might not be a need.
In a sense, if that electronic system was incorporated, so fires were automatically, or the police were automatically alerted to any bushfire reports that the RFS personnel made, would that, in a sense, take away the need for a mandatory reporting system to be introduced because you'll have the technology will do that anyway?
Yeah, potentially, and that's we're looking into that to hopefully to basically there's a disparity with the reporting, as it's quite apparent. There's that disparity with many more fire reports through the fire agency, particularly RFS, compared to our system. So anything that brings that disparity closer is what we're aiming for.
One moment, Your Honour. Just to clarify one point in your evidence before, Counsel Assisting took you to an email, was referred to as an email on the 16th of September 2019 that was sent from Strikeforce Toronto statewide. Just to confirm, that was a Nemesis message. It was sent on the Nemesis system.
Yes.
And that's an automatic system whereby you can choose who you want to be the recipient of your particular email.
Yes.
And you selected that to go statewide.
Police.
To all police.
That was a pre-season, the preparation email that we generally send out, or we do send out annually. I believe that was the one. So that would have went to all sworn police.
Thank you. There's nothing further.
Thank you. Yes, Ms Ward.
Just on this topic of mandated reporting, Detective Chief Inspector, who would be mandated and what would be the consequence of that person not reporting where they were required to report in the scheme as you see it?
I guess the fire captain that's responsible for that attendance at that fire, would there be some onus on them to report, whether it's through their system or because they complete a form in terms of their attendance, a fire report. Perhaps there could be a box they tick to say police informed.
In terms of the information that you would like to see reported to police, what are the sort of triggering events that you would like to see mandatorily reported to police?
I guess predominantly if there's a suspected cause, is it suspicious, ideally? We would hope most suspicious fires, if they deem that, are reported, but it doesn't always happen. anything, I guess, in terms of who attended and the nature of the fire. It doesn't have to be, great detail. I think just to at least notify us of the fire, then we can take it from there and speak to them if we need to at a later stage and interview them. But at least we need to be aware of the fire.
Are there any other organisations or individuals who are currently mandated to report details of fires to New South Wales Police?
Not that I'm aware, no.
Is it fair to say what you're really talking about is a system to ensure that New South Wales Police are advised of all call-outs that the RFS attend where they discover a fire?
Yes.
So that New South Wales Police can then make a decision as to whether or not you need to be involved in an investigation arising?
Yes. And if we can achieve that through our communication system, that would be, even better. So we don't have to, we don't want it onerous for the RFS crews. We get that. But again, it's just trying to get that visibility to know more about these fires, to at least, make a decision as to what investigative response is needed.
Thank you. Those are my questions, Your Honour.
Thanks very much, Detective Chief Inspector, for your very helpful evidence. You're excused. Thank you.
Many of those topics that we've heard from today from Detective Chief Inspector Puffett will be revisited tomorrow with the witnesses from the Rural Fire Service so that they have an opportunity to give the account from the perspective of that organisation. We will proceed evidence tomorrow, hopefully Mr Fullagar, but that will depend on information that we receive in the morning. But that is the plan for tomorrow.
All right, thanks, Ms Ward. Unless there's anything else, we'll adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.